Bradley, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Bradley, first of all, tell people who you are and what you do.
My name is Bradley Tusk. I'm a New Yorker. I'm a dad. I'm most importantly a Mets fan, as we were discussing. But I do a few things. I work in politics, so I own a political consulting firm that runs different types of legislative and policy campaigns all over the country. I work in tech. I run a venture capital fund that invests in early stage tech startups and highly regulated industries. I run a foundation called Tusk Philanthropies, which is using the money that I've made to advance things like mobile voting and universal school meals and different policies that are good for New York City. I own a bookstore and podcast studio on the Lower East Side that loses a ton of money, but I still love owning it, called P&T Knitwear. And then I guess I'm a writer. I've written 3 books. I write a Substack. I write a column for the Daily News. I host a podcast called Firewall. Taught at Columbia for a long time. So.
Well, you're a modern-day Renaissance man. And you're a lawyer, and you're a lawyer.
I am. I've never practiced, but I'm a member of the New York Bar.
You're a lawyer. You passed the bar.
Passed the bar.
So, Bradley, let's start with mobile voting.
Yeah.
Why can't we?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a no-brainer. But it's a no-brainer.
Right, for sure.
Here's what I want to ask first and foremost, right? And you know this is because we're both in the universe of pros and cons, right?
Yes.
Why won't people allow you to mobile vote? What are the concerns, right? What is the lobby against it?
So there's valid concerns, and then there's the actual concerns, right? So the only real valid concern you could articulate would be security, and that's why we've spent the last 4 years building mobile voting technology. Let me walk you through it. So you would go on the App Store. You would download. You live in the city?
Yes.
So you download the New York City Board of Elections app. And the first thing they would do is say, okay, do you really live here? You put in your info, fine. Next question, are you really you? So the first thing is multi-factor authentication. So you know how, like, if you forget your Amazon password, they send you a code, put in that. Then biometric screening, so like Clear at the airport, match up your ID to your actual government ID. Okay, now we know Roberto's really Roberto, right? Ballot comes up on your screen. Ballot's super simple, straightforward. Whenever you're ready and you hit submit, 3 things happen. The ballot's encrypted, the ballot's anonymized, and you get a tracking code like if it were a FedEx package. Goes back to the Board of Elections, and they air gap it, which means they take it offline completely. And once it's totally disconnected to the internet, then they decrypt your ballot. Then a paper copy gets printed out. That gets mixed in with all of the other ballots. You know where your ballot stands because you can see from the tracking code that it was received, printed, tabulated, so on. And then the underlying code itself is totally open source, which means anybody can audit it, anybody could verify, it's totally transparent. So we've been doing this out of my foundation now, different types of work around mobile voting since 2017, totally philanthropic. It's in no way a business thing, I just put my own money into it. And by the way, not meant to replace any form of voting, just give people an additional option. And so we have built that to address any potential security concerns that people will raise. But in reality, the objections will be what they can't say out loud, which is, it's not good for them meaning the status quo, right? And that's going to be, by the way, Democrats and Republicans, unions and business groups, lobbyists. If you live in a world of 10% turnout and you know how to succeed in that world, even if that world is totally dysfunctional and terrible for society, you're still not necessarily looking to change it because you're worried about your next election. But because of the system we have, almost every election is really decided in the primaries because of gerrymandering. Primary turnout is typically about 10%. And who are those voters? They're the far right or the far left or special interests that move money and votes. And so they dictate everything, right? And so either we get the chaos and dysfunction of DC or just totally one-sided governments, and whether it's the city of San Francisco on the left or the state of Texas on the right, none of that is good because it doesn't reflect how actual people feel on most stuff. Like the reality is,
most people agree
on most stuff, right? And yet you would never know that.
But they're not part of the vote, right?
Correct.
They're not part of the electorate.
Exactly.
Question: early voting, big game changer.
Great.
It's now part of the. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
And it also allows people, right, that work multiple jobs, that work weekends or work, election day, can't get to the polls. How did that happen, and why is? Because that changed the game
it did. So that for sure. Look, all these things take people who are, by the way, not just things like early voting or voting reforms, but if you just take a step back, every major right in American history, at least, it's probably true in world history too, that ever been won, the Women's Right to Vote, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the same-sex marriage, Americans' disabilities, whatever it is, Status quo never wanted to do it, but enough people stood up loud enough and long enough and demanded it and hung in there and kept fighting, and eventually it happened. And that's what happened with early voting too, and that's what we're going to have to do here. Can you imagine a world where you have a month to cast your ballot, and instead of having to go somewhere, you can do it from your living room, you can do it while you're waiting for your coffee, on the subway, whatever you want. We had an election in New York, 5 weeks ago for mayor, and Mamdani won pretty decisively.
No, don't go there yet. Not yet.
Okay.
Because I have another question.
Go ahead.
You were the architect of part of the team that sort of organized around Uber, right?
Yes.
And drivers and sort of trying to cap Uber and its capabilities and its ability to ride share, et cetera. You fought against it on behalf of Uber.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that organizing campaign and why aren't you doing the same, or who's part of this coalition?
So we are, and so interestingly, when I started working with, when you think of Uber now, it's this giant $200 billion corporation. But I started working with Travis Kalanick, who's the founder of Uber, in early 2011. Tiny tech startup. I think the conference room of my shitty little office was the Uber New York office at that point, pretty much. And we were only at that point operating in San Francisco. Uber came to New York, and the taxi industry, which is very politically powerful, immediately pounced and said to the regulators, make them go away. And we kind of evaded them for a while, negotiated, and then eventually what we realized, both in New York and in every other single subsequent market in the US, is people really liked Uber, right? When you use Uber now, you're annoyed because it says 4 minutes and it takes 7. But if you think about those first few times, it was magic, right? You're like, I can't believe this just happened. I just did this, and all of a sudden here's a car waiting for me. So we went to those people and said, look, if you like Uber and you want to keep using it, you got to help us. You need to let your elected officials know. And then we built the functionality into the app so that everyone could say to their city council member, their mayor, or whoever, hey, I like this thing, leave it alone. And eventually millions of people did that, and that's how we won, right? We overwhelmed the tax industry. My strategy with mobile voting is the same thing. In fact, Travis Kalanick is part of what we're doing on mobile voting. Because in many ways, that aha moment for mobile voting was, I remember they're literally sitting there thinking like, all right, God bless these people who are doing this because they're making my job easier. But my guess is they don't actually know who their city council member is. They don't vote in state senate primaries. And, they're busy. They got jobs. They got kids. They got lives. But when we made it really easy and we put it on their phone, all of a sudden things changed and they got involved. So the question became, what if they could vote this way? And that's what led to the birth of the mobile voting.
Got it. What are the conversations so far with the state legislature, governor, mayor,
so we're
city
starting at the municipal level, because the idea is, look, let's start local, mayor, council, school board, see how that goes, work our way up. And so we're talking to mayors and cities all over the country, a lot in Colorado, Alaska, looking at Minneapolis, Seattle, and basically, I'll go anywhere that will have me.
What about New York City?
Yeah, I would love to. So I think
those conversations haven't begun.
No, so Albany is very, very hostile to reform in general. And so if I could get a legal opinion that says I could do it through the city charter in a referendum, I think I could probably get it going soon. If I need Albany, I think what I'm going to have to do is start around New York, build up precedent, prove that it works, and then work our way in. But who knows? The other day we were sitting in the office and someone from LA reached out to us and said, can we have a conversation? So, my view is I want to do it wherever we can. Democrat, Republican, one part of the country, another, doesn't matter to me.
Brad, part of this show is political anecdotes.
Yeah.
Rod Blagojevich.
Yes.
Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the election and the outcome, Rod Blagojevich. Yeah. Talk about what a personality.
Yeah, he really was. Look, he is one of the most interesting people I've ever met. And he was, in many ways, the greatest disparity of talent that I've ever seen. So from a pure retail political perspective, he's the best I've ever seen. He was better than Obama. He was better than Clinton. Look, I haven't seen the guy since I literally testified against him in trial 15 years ago. But I would imagine that if he were sitting in that chair right there with us, you'd be like, he's great, because he's so charismatic and so personable. But Rod had this view of the world that was both totally insane and yet weirdly logical, which was he genuinely believed that his job was to run for office, but then he didn't have a job again to do until it was the next time to run for office, and he didn't actually have an interest in doing the job itself of governor. And so I get introduced to him, and I'm 29 years old, I'm working for Mike Bloomberg, he had just become mayor at City Hall, and a friend of mine called and said, hey, would you like to have a conversation about being the deputy governor of Illinois? And I said, well, what's a deputy governor and why are you calling me? They said, it's the guy that runs the state. And I went out there and met with him. And I think I had a combination of different things on my resume he liked. And I think in a way, because he was such a weird, in many ways difficult person to work with, they knew they needed someone young enough that it was a career-making job for them, that I was willing to basically work 80, 90 hours a week and deal with all of his nonsense and bullshit and still keep doing the job.
Quickly, I know it was a statewide position, but
yeah,
draw a contrast between Chicago politics and New York politics.
Yeah, Chicago politics is rougher, a lot rougher. In part because in New York, look, while everyone sort of has an awareness of who the mayor is, we're the home of like so many different industries, right? You got finance, you got media, advertising, fashion, like diplomacy. I mean, there's so many different things that everyone's kind of in their own niche, right? And maybe the mayor to a certain extent cuts across. Bloomberg probably did a little more than anyone else because he also was the richest guy in town at the same time, right? But in Chicago, it's a great city, but there's not nearly as much going on. And as a result, local politics are sort of all-encompassing.
The ward
really
bosses
brutal.
actually
The ward
move a lot of
bosses
people.
yeah, and they really had a lot. Like city councilmen here in New York, they don't have any control over operations, right? So, but in Chicago, they had say into who got jobs at sanitation, what the routes were going to be, the schedule. So they were much more operationally engaged.
Rahm Emanuel's a tough guy, and he had a rough going in Chicago.
He did.
So that says something about how it is.
No, it's not an easy place. And also, by the way, I just think in general, being an executive at any level these days, any place where there's a lot of media attention, it's just hard because you got people coming at you all day long trying to take your head off, and occasionally somebody succeeds. It's funny, now that I've worked in tech and the private sector, you know, I meet all these people who think that everyone who works in government is dumb and lazy and corrupt. Yeah. And I'm like, you have, some people maybe, but overall, like running, you know, I've run companies, and running a government is much harder. Much more
or getting somebody elected.
Yeah, or getting somebody elected.
That is a science.
Right.
And you saw with someone who works with Uber now, David Plouffe.
Yep.
I mean, that whole delegate game was mad, the way they pulled it off with Obama, right? That was, that was brilliant. There's a science to it. Brad, what was your role in the New York City Democratic primary? And then I want to talk a little bit about this current one, yes.
So, me personally, none, because I host a podcast and I had all the candidates
on the podcast. That's right, with Tom Allen, who's a friend.
With Tom, right. So, as a result, I stayed out of it. But two people who worked for me on the side were advising Cuomo. So I had some insight into it. I wasn't involved, but I had some insight. Watched it very closely, and you know, I have probably made myself slightly unpopular in the business community based on the comments that I've made post-election. But my view is that Mamdani is a generational talent. There was 1 million people participating in the primary. The general in 21 was just 1.1 million. And I don't see a world where the guy loses the general election. I know everyone now in the business world is upset and they want to say, well, if we just put a lot of money into Adams or Cuomo, we can win. But I don't believe that, right? Like money can't buy everything. And what I said that seemed to upset some people is if he does become mayor and he wants my help, I will help him because I live here. I love this city. I raise my kids here. I have multiple businesses here. Like, I want New York to do well. And if he is the person that New Yorkers choose to be their mayor, and I can help him be good at his job, I'm going to do that.
Bradley, what did the other candidates do? Give me former Governor Cuomo.
Yeah. So Andrew,
he should have done more of this and less of that.
So first of all, it's not clear he wanted to be mayor, right? I think he wanted to be somebody again. He wanted to be back in politics again.
Redemption.
Redemption. But there was never like a clear sense of like he loved the city and had this great vision for the city, right? He never quite seemed on top of it. That's number one. Number two, there was no real positive vision. It was all negative vision. It was like, you know, the city's falling apart and only I can protect you. And sometimes that message works. But, you know, as we saw with Obama, when you give people real excitement and hope and vision, they like it. And whether or not Mamdani's ideas are practical, they were appealing. So number two is that Cuomo didn't really have a vision. Number three, he didn't campaign that hard, you know, and the truth is, like when I ran Mike Bloomberg's campaign in 2009, every morning at 5 a.m., I would send Mike an email saying, here's who's endorsing you today. We rolled out an endorsement every single day from the day we announced until Election Day. And it could be from Colin Powell and Al Gore and Bono to the Korean Grocery Association. Didn't matter to me who it was. It was just I want to have someone every day. I say, here are the polls. Here's where the door knocks were last night. Here's everything going on. And about 5:03, I get a response from Mike saying, okay, great, whatever it is. And then whatever I needed Mike to do, he was on board to do it. And Mike's not someone who loves politics, but nonetheless, he's an incredibly hard worker. And that's what it takes to run a successful mayoral campaign. And if you're not putting everything you have into it, it's really hard to succeed. Like on the night before the election, Mamdani walked from the tip of northern Manhattan all the way to the Battery. Right. That was a great stunt, right? And I don't know what Cuomo was doing, but he seemed to live in a world where it was like still 20 years ago in terms of politics, right?
Talk about the ranked choice strategy that Mamdani employed, right?
Yeah.
With Lander.
It was very smart.
And here's the other thing. What are your thoughts on, for better or worse, when they asked former Governor Cuomo who else he was ranking, and he said nobody.
Right.
Despite receiving the endorsement of Senator Ramos and Whitney Tilson.
Yeah, right. So one, it just said a lot about who Andrew Cuomo is, right? Andrew Cuomo is just about Andrew Cuomo. Always has been. Always
well, was it smart, right?
No,
that's what I meant.
No,
right?
because what it did, quite frankly, was it confirmed what people already thought, which is like, this is not a good guy. This is not a nice guy. This is someone who is totally Trumpian and selfish and everything else. Whereas Mamdani had multiple alliances. He had Lander, he had Michael Blake, and so that was really smart. And he was able to pick up support. And also the left, the DSA and everyone else kind of had a anyone but Cuomo strategy. And they were, to a certain extent, combined resources between Lander and Mamdani, and it worked.
Brad, what did you think? What was the game changer for Mamdani? What was the thing that tipped him over, right? Yeah. Considering the overwhelming majority of where the governor called him that very night and said, look, congratulations, you won, I lose. And what was it? Was it Lander? Was it Ocasio? Was it Bernie Sanders?
All of that was very helpful.
But what do you think was the thing?
I'm going to come a couple of candidates.
Please, please.
So one would be, I think early voting, like you mentioned before, was unbelievably helpful in the sense that this groundswell of support became really apparent, and that just built on itself. It built momentum and just drove more and more people into his camp. So that's number one. Number two is, I think, and look, I don't agree with his positions on this necessarily, but I think he used the Israel situation really, really intelligently from a political standpoint, which is, it was a feature of his campaign, not a bug, right? Like, he understood that there was a lot of people, both Jewish and non-Jewish, who were really upset with what was happening, and there's no real way for anyone to sort of express themselves on that politically. It's not like we have an election for Israeli, leaders. And so in a way, he kind of made it a referendum in many ways on Netanyahu and what was happening there. And a lot of people said, this is one way I can express it. So he was really smart to capitalize that. And I think he understood that it, wasn't just non-Jews. A lot of people. I'm Jewish, and I wrote my Substack today saying this has to end because it's bad for Israel, right? Forget about what it's doing to the actual people in Gaza. So I think that was really critical. And the third would be the cross endorsements with Lander.
Interesting. Brad, let's talk a little bit about now going forward. If let's say conceivably Mamdani is the nominee, right? He wins in November.
Yep.
What would you advise him in terms of personnel? For example, the big one, and you talk about getting the business community a little bit peeved to comments. Big one is Police Commissioner Jesse Tisch, right? And de Blasio, right? Again, people perceived him as this, lefty, and he, brought in Bratton, and that led him a level. Alicia Glenn, right, had come from Goldman Sachs. It basically calmed some fears of, that the city allegedly, right, we saw.
Bratton's good. Bratton's a good commissioner. Jesse's clearly a very good commissioner.
So would you advise him?
I would certainly done that. I would certainly say keep her, because it would do three things. One, and then I'll get to he and I have actually had a conversation about hiring, so I'll tell you what we discussed.
Oh, interesting.
But one is, if you kept Jesse, obviously you care about talent because she's unbelievably talented. Mm-hmm. Two, clearly you care about the city being safe and well run and orderly because, if you wanted to defund the police, you wouldn't have someone like her in charge. And three, the police commissioner is one of your top 3 appointees, something like that. So how much of an anti-Semite can you be when one of your most critical people is Jewish, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think he would be really well advised. I talked about this when he was on my podcast. I said to him, listen, you have all the affordability stuff, ideology, and it works well in an election, but the job itself is an operational job, right? It's really not an ideological job. And what made Mike an effective mayor, more so than like how smart he is or how hard he works or anything else, is he just said, I want the best people I can get and didn't give a shit about politics or anything else. And thousands of people like you and me showed up in city government, and then he let us work. And most of those people did really good things. And I remember Mike used to say, you know, I don't care if someone's a communist, if they're the best person to like pick to run the sanitation department, I want them there. So said, Zohran, you should say, I don't care if someone's a capitalist, if they're the best person to pick up the trash, they should be the sanitation commissioner. So what he said to me was, as long as someone doesn't disagree with me on the thing that I'm hiring them to do, fair enough, I don't care what their politics are. If he means that, there are lots of really talented, smart people in the city and around the country who I'm sure would love to come be a commissioner, an assistant commissioner, a deputy commissioner, a deputy mayor, whatever it is. And I think he could build a really good team. If he doesn't mean that, and he only wants to hire people who see the world exactly the way he does, he's going to have a hard time because most people in his ideological camp don't have management experience, don't have operational experience, and they're going to fail. So my hope is that he sees the bigger picture. He says he does, and we'll find out soon.
Bradley, what do you think of the non-endorsements? And what does it mean in terms of the national narrative in the Democratic politics? Because let's face it, the only people in the Democratic Party that are driving people to rallies are the people that align, with his politics.
Well, did you see that
to serve as a counter. No one that's a moderate is getting people out to these rallies at the level of Bernie, at the level of Ocasio. And again, here's a guy, Brooklynite, older man, young Puerto Rican from the Bronx, woman,
New York City,
right? So you're talking about the spectrum, a Muslim, right, born in Uganda, and they're the ones driving people in the Democratic Party.
They're incredibly charismatic people. They believe in something. I don't agree with.
But Brad, where I'm going with this is Hakeem hasn't endorsed. Senator Schumer hasn't endorsed. Some of the county leaders haven't endorsed. What does this mean? Do you think it's a smart play?
So a few things. One, I am of the view that endorsements from other politicians means nothing. It's a huge waste of time. There might be someone like a Bernie, a Trump, and a Republican. Occasionally there's an outlier figure. But overall, campaigns spend so much time, waste so much time, like, oh, we got to get this state senator on board, or we got to get this assembly member or council member. Look, back in the days where there was a real machine, different story, but it doesn't exist anymore.
But Brad, what I'm saying is this is not common. Usually you win the Democratic nominee and everyone's falling over each other, right?
For sure.
We even saw with former Governor Cuomo. A lot of people this is inevitability, it's going to happen. And here it is, the actual nominee who won hands down is having a hard time.
In 2009, because Mike was the Republican and independent nominee at the time, I remember having conversations with the equivalent people from New York, and they're saying to me, look, I really like Mike. I like working with him. You guys are going to win. I'm going to be a good partner to you. I have to endorse Bill Thompson because he's the Democratic nominee. I was like, I get it, no problem. Here, they're not doing it because they're sort of stuck between hearing from donors, different interest groups, and then constituents. But the reality is, it might be at their peril because if I'm Mamdani, the truth is, I'd be just as happy not to have them. He doesn't need Hakeem's endorsement to win. But guess what happens if he wins without it? He doesn't owe him anything, right? And so in a lot of ways, he actually might be advantaged by not getting it.
But what do you think this means in terms of the national play? Like conceivably, Bedford-Stuyvesant voters, decided they want Mamdani, is my understanding, based on the numbers, right? And we saw another instance in terms of the left once upon a time where someone was eyeing leadership to the point where they weren't eyeing their own backyard, and we know how that turned out, right? So my question is, as someone who's consulting, what are your thoughts overall?
The problem, did you see the Wall Street Journal poll the other day about so it was something like 33-65 was the approved, disapproved Democratic Party. It was the lowest rating in 60 years that the party has had. They need a new coach, right? If this was sports, you'd get a new coach, you'd get a new GM. The people who are in charge, and by the way, like I worked for Schumer, I like Hakeem.
No, these are all friends, right?
But it's not working.
We're just being analytical.
But at the end of this day, they don't have a narrative that appeals to voters. The far left politicians do. And as a result, it's kind of a mess because that 33 are the people who like Ocasio, Sanders, Zohran, people like that. But the other 66 who maybe don't identify with the far left, they got nowhere to go. Because all the Democrats seem to do is define themselves based on opposition to Trump as opposed to any sort of proactive agenda. It's like what we just discussed, whereas Andrew Cuomo, when he ran for mayor, or still running, I guess, had no proactive real vision. It was just what he was against, right? Zohran has an agenda. Again, a lot of it would be hard to implement in the way he proposed it, although I think there are ways to get there in most of it. But you got to have something proactive and positive for people to understand and support, and the Democrats don't have that right now.
Let's move to the state now, Brad. Yeah. Now Congressman Lawler has decided he doesn't want to run for governor. Congressman Richie Torres, who for a while was, right?
Richie's a good friend of ours.
Yeah,
so
yes. He was pushing the envelope, if you will, right?
Yes.
And now he's decided he's not interested, and then you have Lieutenant Governor Delgado.
Right.
Essentially, the way you're reading the tea leaves, what do you think of the outcome of that race is? Do you think it's, again, and the governor has a lot of money in the war chest, right? It's difficult. Her numbers are moving in the right direction. What's your analysis on that race? Does Delgado's been sort of trying to court the left and
I don't think it's working. Like, first of all, Antonio, I remember when I supported Antonio when he ran for Congress. And I remember when he got the lieutenant governor job, I sent him a one-word text which just said, why? Like, why would you want this do-nothing job when you have a role in the national government? And his real answer, in quite articulate this way, is he was afraid of the redistricting and afraid that he would lose his seat, so the safe move was to become lieutenant governor. But the problem is, it's a useless job, right? So like when I was deputy governor of Illinois, every other week I would meet with Pat Quinn, who at the time was lieutenant governor, because I felt bad for Pat. He was a nice man with nothing to do, and I was like, all right, let me just spend an hour with him and just sort of see what's on his mind. You know, so like, I think Antonio made a mistake. He would have been better off running for this job from Congress than he is as lieutenant governor. I don't think he's really catching on, and I think that primary is right now not that challenging at the moment for Hochul. And then when you look forward to the general election, you know, it's going to be Hochul versus Stefanik. And I'll tell you what I see Stefanik doing, which is she's trying to beat Trump. Right, like I saw, I forget what it was now, in the paper today, she had some insult for someone, some nicknames she made up on Twitter or whatever it is, and it's kind of like when Jordan left basketball. They kept trying to who's the next Jordan. And until LeBron emerged, there was no next Jordan. There were good players, Kobe, Shaq, whoever, but trying to pretend to be somebody doesn't work. And I think if Stefanik tries to run as Trump light, one, I think that's really tough. I think Trump can do Trump. I'm not sure anyone else can. And two, right now, if New York remains sort of wildly anti-Trump overall, that's going to result in pretty big turnout in the midterms. That may be more about an expression of the federal elections, but nonetheless, Hochul's on the same ballot, so I think she's the beneficiary of that.
Brad, let's have some fun now. 3 things you would have told your younger self. 21-year-old Bradley Tusk.
Yeah. So not
3
only,
pieces of advice.
I'm going to do that, but I'll also say, if you like this whole thing, when I turned 50 a year ago.
Yes, I read it. That's where I got that.
Yeah, I wrote something about that. So it's on my Substack.
So say it. Say what are the 3 things you would have told 21-year-old Bradley Tusk about life?
It's up and down. Right? Like, I think what we all want to think
peaks and valleys.
Once I get this settled and that settled, everything's going to be clear. It's just not the way it goes, right? Like, things go really well, then things don't. And like, you have to be able to just sort of recognize that and kind of surf the waves of it, because, you know, we would all like it to be easy all the time, but that's just not reality, right? So that's number 1. Number 2, I would say, only 2 things really determine human happiness overall, assuming you're healthy, assuming you aren't homeless or anything like that, which is relationships and fulfillment. People who have other people in their lives that they love unconditionally, support unconditionally, and vice versa, and people who do things, it could be their work, it could be their religion, it could be their volunteer activity, whatever it is, that bring them a sense of meaning and purpose, are happy people, right? Harvard did this study, started in 1934, called the Grant Study. You know what it is because you're nodding. And what they did was really interesting. They took a group of sophomore men, they took a group of working class young men in Boston and said, we just want to know what makes people happy. And they studied them their entire lives And what they concluded effectively was, like the guy who in the book was the happiest was a Harvard graduate who became a public school teacher in Vermont because his job gave him a real sense of fulfillment, and he had a great relationship with his family, and the kids loved him and everything else. And that was actually better than the CEOs and the US senators and everything else. And so number 2 would be focus on your relationships, do things that give you meaning and purpose. Look, I'm a first generation American. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. Then I worked in government, didn't make much money. And then I got lucky because when I worked for Uber, they couldn't afford my fee, so I took stock and that became Uber. So then I made a lot of money, and I like having money, right? My Mets tickets are fantastic. My Knicks tickets are pretty good too. So like, it's better than not having it. But at the end of the day, the stuff that really makes me happy, I've noticed, is either being with people that I love and care about, or doing things that to me feel meaningful. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, 2 things happened. One, it's a small thing, but I often pick a New York City issue and just try to influence it. So e-bikes, the city e-bikes, you're supposed to be 16 years old to use it, but there's no age verification whatsoever. And I saw my son and all of his friends, it's sort of the teenage boy thing to do in New York, is like jump on these e-bikes and ride them at top speed. They never wear a helmet because it looks uncool. And Lyft, who owns City Bike, should be required to do real age verification. And so we launched a campaign yesterday just to say, hey, you need to do this now, and I'm going to start putting more and more political pressure on them until hopefully they do it. Is it the biggest thing in the world? No, it's not. There are things we certainly worked on that have had more impact, but I think it'll save some kids' lives and save some families, right? And then last night, I went with my daughter to a concert. We went to the Beacon and we saw the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and she's 19. And the fact that she was willing to go with me, to me, I was so grateful, that she thought I was cool enough. Now, I bought the best tickets you could possibly get. We were right there. It was awesome. But those were the 2 things yesterday that ultimately probably were much more meaningful than, whatever deal I did or didn't make at work or anything else like that.
3 most influential books you ever read.
So, Advise and Consent is a book by a guy named Alan Drury. It was from the 1950s. It was about a Senate confirmation hearing for like a cabinet job. And I read it when I was like in 5th or 6th grade. My dad gave it to me, and it just fascinated me, and I got interested in politics and have sort of stayed interested in it ever since, as you can tell from this conversation. So that was really, really meaningful. 2, probably The Power Broker. So my first job out of college, I was a spokesman for the New York City Parks Department, worked there for 4 years, and Moses was the Parks Commissioner, and Moses was a very complicated guy. A lot of bad, a lot of good, but he got shit done. Right? And I think, to me, what I learned from that is like, you can have all the process you want, but either at the end of the day, you make stuff happen or you don't. And that doesn't mean you make things happen by breaking the law or hurting people necessarily. But, if you're, generally speaking, I judge myself on like, not just did I try, but did I succeed? Did I change this policy, this law, this person's life in this way? And when I can point to an actual outcome, it's a lot better to me. So, I would say that's number 2. And the number 3 is a weird one. Do you know who Don Winslow is?
No.
So Don Winslow is like a crime writer. Fun books, you'd enjoy them, but not like, it's not Dostoevsky, right?
Yeah.
He had a book, I think it might have been like The Gentleman's Hours, but it's like surfers and drug dealers in San Diego. And there was just a random line in there, but I always come back to it, where it's one character talking to another and said, the meaning of life, grasshopper, is to do the right thing, and the next, one after the other, and that's it. And I think that's basically right, because what I have realized is I am happy when I feel good about myself. When I feel like I'm doing things that I am proud of, I feel good. And if I do something shitty, it doesn't matter how successful I appear. I just feel bad about the thing that I did, and therefore bad about myself. And that doesn't mean that we don't make mistakes. We all do. But generally speaking, that little quip from a dumb crime novel, to me, really stuck with me.
Brad, name three people who blew you away in terms of how smart they were in your political life. Can't be Bloomberg.
Okay.
Not giving you that.
All right. He was. All right.
No, Bloomberg.
All right.
That you've had the pleasure of working with and or knowing.
All right. So
they just said, man, this person.
I'll go with Schumer. So I was Chuck's communications director in the Senate.
What separates Chuck from Senator Schumer from the rest of it?
One, works harder than literally anybody. Like, just his work ethic is just unrivaled. And by the way, keeping up with him, I mean, I'm a hard worker, and like, I kept up with him, but it was a lot. Chuck was sort of the personification of what drives politicians, right? In terms of, it's not really about public policy, it's not really about laws, it's about, they really need affirmation and validation at all times. And Chuck was sort of the best and the worst of everything simultaneously. And by seeing that sort of firsthand, talking to him all day, every day for 2 straight years, I really learned what makes politicians tick. And I would say everything that I've done since is really taking that knowledge and then applying it in different ways. Travis Kalanick, founder of Uber, among the smartest. In fact, I remember once we were in my office in New York, and we were sitting there, and I'm on another call, and it's like this complicated potential client to do with like, heating, tax credits, and trade, and carbonization. Like, I still didn't try to understand at the time. He's only hearing my half of the conversation, didn't even know what I was talking about, and then started offering me on the call advice of what to say that was like far more intelligent than anything I would have come up with. And his relentlessness also is just incredible. We work together now on his new startup, Cloud Kitchens, and just, there's almost no one I would invest in ahead of him. And then the third's kind of a funny one, but it's a guy named Doug Perry. So Doug was a singer from the Metropolitan Opera. I'm not an opera guy at all. I don't know nothing about it. But Doug runs a soup kitchen on 16th Street, 2nd and 3rd called Common Table in the basement of a church. And I've been volunteering there for about 12 years now, once a week. And what I love about Doug is this is a man who just like, we talk about sort of a zero-sum worldview and an abundance worldview. I try very hard to have an abundance worldview, to have a life that's filled with love and kindness and decency. But I got to work at it, right? I'm not sure all of it comes totally naturally to me. This man just personifies all of it, and people love him from, the homeless person who's the most down and out to the volunteer that's, like me, that could pay for everything or whatever else in between. And like to have that level of goodness and optimism, I don't have that. I probably never will, but I admire it tremendously.
Brad, let's wrap this up. Anything you want to add that I forgot to ask you that you want to mention?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, mobile voting, right? So we got into it a little bit, but what I would say is we're now going to start running campaigns in cities all over the U.S. to legalize it. And as we discussed, the powers that be are not going to want it. And we're only going to win with a big grassroots movement. So anyone watching this, if you're interested in what we're doing, please go to mobilevoting.org. And if you want to volunteer in any way, you could sign up to do so. Let's be honest. One, it's crazy that I'm just a random dude, is the one trying to fix democracy with mobile voting. It should be like the government, not me. Two, I'm making this shit up as I go along completely, right? I could tell you what my plan is, but at the end of the day, it's pretty, happenstance. So I need all the help I can get. I did just do a TED Talk on mobile voting, so you could check that out too. It came out like 2 weeks ago. Yeah. I think it came up on YouTube today. And so people can check that out. So yeah, mobile voting is the kind of thing we're doing that. I really believe in it. I think it's the only scalable solution to democracy. But I also know that it's going to take a lot more than me and my, kind of ragtag team of misfits to make this thing happen. And so, would be grateful for anyone's help.
I want one last one. I'm sorry I said it last. Sure. 3 young politicians you're impressed with. In terms of, you were in Illinois. You were in Illinois. Yeah. You saw the Obama in 2 years.
Yeah,
from a state senator.
Totally.
To the president.
You want to hear something really stupid? When I was in law school, he was a professor there. And I didn't take his class because the other guy was like so famous in the world of constitutional law. I'm like, I got to take David Curry's class. He's this great scholar. I remember struggling to stay awake in every con law class with Curry, and then fucking Obama becomes Obama. But I did get to work with him when he was a state senator and I was deputy governor. And I would say I knew he was really talented, but if you asked me in like 2003, is this guy going to be president in 5 years? And I never would have said yes, right? Look, Zohran obviously is just remarkable political talent. Richie Torres is another one that is really impressive to me and stands out. I'm forgetting his name, but there's a state rep in Texas who was on Rogan the other day, and I listened to the interview with him. Latino guy, really, really impressive. So that's another one. And generally speaking, for me, like I love mayors and governors and kind of executives who actually run shit and do shit more than kind of, like politicians who talk about stuff. I should also mention my brother-in-law, Josh Gottheimer, is a member of Congress and a prominent member of Congress and very effective at his job. He's 50, so I don't know if he's young, but he is very talented.
Brad, if you had a magic wand, who would you nominate for the Democratic nomination to take on Trump? Wes Moore? Shapiro?
It's a great question. Here's the reason. So my head goes to where yours is. A smart centrist governor, you name two, and we could pick out another, Bashir, Cooper, Whitmer, whatever, right? There's a group. I just look at that Wall Street Journal poll from Sunday, and I'm like, fuck. Like, it feels to me like a pretty wholesale rejection of the mainstream Democratic narrative. It's like part of the problem with Harris was she was nothing but an embodiment of the Democratic mainstream, which isn't bad, but just wasn't what the voters wanted, right? And I worry that as talented as, look, and Wes is super talented. Wes is probably the most talented of that group, but they're all people that I would be happy to see as president. I just worry that they're not the answer. At the same time, if AOC runs, I think she'll be super formidable, but I think going all the way would be pretty tough.
Right, so you think the party needs to move in the direction of the New Deal?
Something.
Great society, right?
Some
where
vision
the Democratic Party was about, right?
Right? I think
social programs and building.
So if it were me, I would do universal basic income. I believe that is ultimately the best policy that we could have because having run a bunch of budgets in government, what I see is money goes, I spend $1 or you spend $1 on taxes, and by the time that it goes up the chain, down the chain, and money gets siphoned off for 50 other things that don't really matter, the person who needs getting like 30 cents on the dollar. And imagine instead if money every week came out of our account and went directly to someone who needs to feed their kids, who can't pay their rent, who doesn't have health care. I think we could help a lot more people. And this was Dr. King's idea back in the early 60s. This is not a new concept. Andrew Yang made it popular in the presidential campaign in 2020. But to me, I believe in free markets. I believe in capitalism. I believe in innovation. But at the same time, I believe in helping people. And I've now spent 30 odd years in and around government. And what I've learned is government is very necessary for certain things. So infrastructure, defense, law enforcement, all of that. But I think when it comes to just helping people in need, there are probably better ways to do it than we do it right now. And I think universal basic income would be the best way.
If Mayor Adams is a one-term mayor,
yes,
what would you say was the biggest mistake he made if you were someone who's been around a long time like
so
yourself?
I don't think it's the corruption stuff.
Okay,
I don't. I think it's a combination of he hired too many of his buddies who were not qualified to necessarily run things and gave them way too much power, and as a result, they fuck things up. The other thing that Eric, and he still doesn't seem to get this, which is he'll say to you, well, look at the stats. The city is pretty safe. It's pretty this, pretty that. The people don't feel it, right? And it doesn't matter what you say, how they should feel, if they don't feel that way, and he never seemed to understand that disparity. And like the problem is, the stats might say one thing, but you go into the subway and there's a guy either peeing on himself or just totally whacked out, and you're nervous, right? Human beings, and like, if you walk around a city where it doesn't feel clean and safe and well run, and look, he made a lot of mistakes. For example, how do you let thousands of illegal weed shops just stay open for a year? It's like, that's fucking, what if I open the cocaine store? Is that okay? Or shop, the scaffolding thing. Like, so we finally helped get a bill passed in March to get rid of it, but he didn't really do that much about it. He did a little bit, but the shoplifting epidemic, people riding e-bikes the wrong way on the sidewalk, and like, they're not maybe the biggest things, but it all contributed to a feeling that no one's in charge and the city's out of control. And he never seemed to really understand that. And I think he could have, with a real focused effort, taken care of most of those problems, and also been clear with New Yorkers that he understood those were the problems, and he didn't do so. And no matter what he says, like, I just saw a poll that came back this morning, and he was underwater by over 50 points, right? So like, the voters just don't want the guy, right? And so I think fundamentally, and then I said this to Mamdani also, like, especially for the re-election, if they feel like the city is clean and safe and well run, they will give you another term, almost no questions asked. If they don't feel that way, it doesn't matter what the stats are. It doesn't matter how much money you spend on ads or anything else. They're not going to go for it.
Brad, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
But you got to promise to come back.
I would love to come back.
We got to talk a little more sports.
Yeah, I would love to.
Thank you so much, Brad. Appreciate you.